Welcome to You Not Crazy Conversations of Hope. We are on episode 4 today, talking about rewriting the narrative so that we can break generational cycles. Listen, many times we are presented with a problem that we don't even know is a problem, right? This is what we call intergenerational trauma. A lot of times trauma survivors, unbeknownst to them, pass down their unresolved trauma to their children or their grandchildren. This a lot of times is reflected in behaviors, attitudes, coping mechanisms, and ultimately this contributes to the family patterns, right? So we may be familiar within our families about how certain patterns happen. For example, let someone say, hey, you just like your mama. Let's say your auntie says that to you. When she gets mad, she disappears. There go that avoidance, right? And so then now you're doing the same thing. You're being avoidant. So a lot of times generational trauma, and that can include patterns, personalities, that gets passed down through generations. And at some point, we have to assess the things that we are carrying from our parents and their parents' parents. Is that healthy? Right? So I really want to hone in today on what we can do to begin to rewrite the narrative, especially if the narrative has been an unhealthy narrative within our family systems. Right? And so what are some unhealthy narratives? This is where maybe divorce is a common pattern within families, right? Or whether financial instability is a common pattern, or whether substance misuse is a pattern. Let's say, if my mom drank anytime she was overwhelmed and she did it several days out the week, then I may be more prone to be drinking several times out of a week as well. So we have to assess, are these patterns something that we want to continue, or do we need to rewrite the narrative? All right. So with that being said, in order for us to recognize patterns and triggers, we have to start with reflecting on family history. We're going to have to ask some questions. If your parents or your guardians, whether that was an auntie or grandmother, still alive, ask questions about how they dealt with stress, how their family before them dealt with stress, right? This is us collecting enough information, right? We also want to know how any struggles or obstacles or challenges that they face growing up. Why is this important? Because in order for me to rewrite the narrative, I need to know what I'm up against. I need to know what challenges I may face in order for me to rewrite it. I need to know what was going on. All right. So ultimately, we have to ask those questions. We need to have the conversation. I find a lot of times that when people are like, hey, I'm dealing with symptoms of anxiety, and when I get anxious, then I get mad, and then I'm yelling at my kids. And then I may ask, well, when your parents got mad and they got anxious, did they respond the same way to you? And usually a light bulb goes off and you're like, ding, you're right. They did the same thing. So we have to have those conversations with our family members, all right? And ask those questions. Then sometimes we need to sit back and observe. If you grew up in a family like mine, we used to always have barbecues. And sometimes I can remember from childhood exactly what was going on just by observing patterns that were going on in the family, right? So I knew that certain people were always prone to be late because I observed, right? I knew that certain things could trigger reactions and there were arguments that would happen because I was observant, right? So sometimes in order for us to prepare to rewrite the narrative, we have to observe the patterns and things that are going on within our families. And we have to identify, is that something healthy, or is that something that can contribute to further mental health issues down the line, or can hinder any type of growth that I want to have with my family, right? So ultimately, in order for me to rewrite my family narrative and create new legacies, after I am collecting information, after I'm asking those questions, after I'm observing patterns, I now need to take this information and I need to reflect on how this information has impacted my family and then how it's now impacting me. Why is that important? Because the impact is really what's going to determine what needs to be changed. So that means considering how your upbringing and family dynamics have influenced your coping strategies, your current relationships, your responses to stress. This is why that self-reflection is key. So you can see, you know what? Maybe I am showing up in this relationship just how mom did. Or maybe when I recognize and pay attention that, hey, my mom didn't really have friends, I really don't have friends, right? So a lot of times after I'm reviewing and asking questions and I'm reflecting and I'm really allowing myself to consider how my family dynamics have played a part into who I am, that way I'm now able to say, okay, once I have all this information, I can now create a new legacy for my family, right? And so ultimately, consciously rewriting our family narratives and creating new legacy of mental wellness really involves intentional efforts, all right? So because when we've been conditioned and taught to do things a certain way, listen, it is absolutely hard to stop doing that thing. Right. So I knew for me personally, growing up, I had to really work on my mouth. Sassy. And I know I get it from my dad. Right. So I really had to be intentional about my mouth because it was really impacting how I showed up in relationships. All right. And so ultimately, we have to identify those patterns so that they can resonate with us just enough so that we can say, this is no longer working, right? And so utilizing a few things will really help you rewrite the narrative and create the legacy that you're looking to create for your family. All right. And so first and foremost, I'm always going to push therapy. Listen, because sometimes we need someone from the outside looking in, doing a family history with us, being able to kind of track our family origin and helping us see how we learn certain personality traits, how we learn to regulate our emotions or the lack of, how we learn to cope. And so what a therapist would do is really sit with you and help you see, okay, this is why you respond this way when you're mad. This is why you may self-medicate with shopping or with alcohol when your emotions are heavy, because this is what you learn and it was conditioned in the household, right? And so a therapist really is going to help you build those self-awareness skills. So then in order to rewrite our narrative, that it requires those self-management skills, the things that we now have to put in place so we're not repeating the patterns. Patterns don't just stop on their own. Right. So a lot of times when certain personality traits are passed down through generations, these are things that are just inherited, that we just pick up, we're conditioned, we're experiencing over and over and over. So we need something that's going to be our stopping point for us, right? And that is therapy. All right. So we learn those self-awareness skills so that we can manage ourselves better. And then therapy also allows you to hone on into those skills that maybe wasn't cultivated or developed or even introduced. So again, therapy is really going to help you recognize skills that maybe have not been developed for you, right? So if you grew up in a family where communication wasn't something that was done beyond, hey, how was school? Did you do your homework? And there was no communication around emotions. When emotions come up, you may be prone not to have those conversations around emotions, right? And so therapy is really going to help you recognize those patterns and maybe the skills that were not there for you growing up so that you can develop those skills. All right. In addition, in order to begin rewriting the narrative and creating new legacies for you and your family, you also have to learn how to have self-care practices, right? And that may also mean being more compassionate with yourself when you recognize that you are responding as you were conditioned and you don't like it and you recognize it's unhealthy. But self-care says, you know what, I'm going to be patient with myself. I'm going to allow myself to make a mistake as I'm learning, because rewriting the narrative, especially if you don't have a roadmap, meaning if now you are making changes that no one else was able to do so or didn't even think to start making the changes to do, it can be scary to do that, right? And so self-care means I am going to make sure that I'm compassionate with myself. I'm going to give myself grace. I'm going to make sure I, don't be so hard on myself. Why I am trying to rewrite the narrative, why I am trying to create new legacies. All right. So make sure that you are compassionate and demonstrating self-care practices, right? So ultimately, when it comes to creating new legacies, especially when it hasn't been done, as I mentioned, it can be a challenge, right? Because if everyone's always done it one way, they're going to sometimes expect you to still do it that way. And sometimes when you try to make that change, people are going to say something like, oh, she thinks she better. Oh, look at her. Because they don't understand why you're doing things different, right? And so I want to encourage you that it's going to be challenging sometime to set a new path for your family or to rewrite that narrative, especially if you did not have a good or solid, healthy roadmap. But I want to encourage you that all you have to do is take one foot and put it in front of the other, one step at a time. It's a process. Eventually you will get there. All right. And so I want to encourage you to strive for a future where you are paying attention to the generational patterns that have not been effective, that has also impacted you, impacted other family members. And I want you to strive for a generation where you make that change. All right. So I want to leave you with a quote. As always, a takeaway. It says, breaking intergenerational trauma within the family system requires courage to confront the past, compassion to heal the present, and commitment to shape a brighter future. But with each intentional step forward, we can rewrite the story of our family, creating a legacy of resiliency, healing, and hope. So here's a question. What steps can you take to challenge inherited patterns of behaviors, beliefs, and coping mechanisms within your family? How can you foster healing, resilience, and empowerment for yourself and future generations? Well, I really hope that you took away something from today's episode. Thank you for tuning in. As always, I really hope that this discussion empowers you with the knowledge and the insight, offering you the guidance to navigate any obstacles that you may have, even around generational patterns. I hope that you take the time to be intentional on rewriting the narrative and creating new legacies. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Don't forget to share, because you never know who may need this message to remind them that they're not crazy. They just needed a conversation of hope.